Should I stay or should I go? Every founder asks themselves this question at one point or another. Whether it's uncertainty about being the right person for the job, feeling tired, or wanting to move in a new direction, the thought of transitioning to another CEO inevitably crosses the mind of every entrepreneur I've ever met. Today's guest on the show is Evgeny Shadchnev, who's an entrepreneur. He's also the author of a book called Startup CEO Succession, A Founder's Guide to Leadership Transition. Evgeny founded a coding bootcamp and ran it for 7 years before he decided it was time to shift, and he brought in a new CEO. This experience and the significant change around his identity and role inspired him to specialize in CEO succession, and he now guides founders through this complex and emotional journey. In today's episode, Evgeny and I discuss the 9-step roadmap for CEO succession, how to overcome the fears associated with transitioning out as a founder, the importance of starting the conversation about succession as early as possible, and how to decide what to do after you step down. For all of my founder friends out there considering their next move, you're going to really appreciate Evgeny's experience and his perspective. And by the way, even if you wind up staying with the same company for life, you'll still gain valuable insights into how to think about transitions and succession in a new way. I hope you enjoy this episode of the Conscious Entrepreneur Podcast. Evgeny, thanks for coming on the show. Great to see you.
Thank you for having me.
Now, you've got a very interesting career trajectory and perspective. You were the CEO of Makers, which was previously known as Makers Academy. You transitioned out of that role. You're now an executive coach. And along the way, you decided to pick up and become really a champion for the concepts around CEO and founder succession. And this is a really important topic for the listeners of the Conscious Entrepreneur Podcast, because many of them are early stage entrepreneurs, and they're starting to think about what happens when my company succeeds, when my company gets bigger. How does my role need to evolve? What skill sets do I need to develop? And how comfortable am I going from founder to CEO? And all those sorts of questions. So things that are really, really important for you and that come up in this amazing book that you just wrote, Startup CEO Succession, A Founder's Guide to Leadership. Now, that just came out in June of 2024. It's got a foreword by Jerry Colonna, who is someone that we both know and respect. And so this is a really meaningful work because it's shining a light on what is normally considered, and these are your words, a taboo topic, meaning something that doesn't get talked about a lot. Once I get to a certain stage as a founder, CEO, how do I decide? Do I stick with it? Do I leave? Do I need to go find someone else? So this is a really rich topic of conversation for us today. Before we get into it, tell us about how you decided that this was going to be a topic that you wanted to spend time and energy writing about and bringing your ideas into the marketplace.
So, in a way, I felt that the decision was made for me because when I started coaching founders, several people reached out to me specifically because of my experience of stepping down as a CEO from the company I started and hiring a new chief executive to lead it going forward. And by working with them, I realized that this is a taboo topic. There are questions and no one really talks about this process in the open, but there is appetite for discussing it. And at some point, after a couple of years, I realized that I know something about the topic, and I need to just write it down. And it looks like it should be a book, and that's why I wrote the book. And I really hope it will be useful to many founders out there.
So you cited your personal example as a transition that was pretty well executed. Obviously, it wasn't perfect. I'm sure there were some bumps along the way. But tell us about your decision. Tell us about your state. So kind of what was going on in your mind, what was going on in your world, what was going on in the business, and how it was that you decided, okay, I need to transition out. And then what did that process wind up looking like?
So just to give a bit of context for the situation, we started the business in the business to consumer space. At Makers, we train complete beginners to be professional software developers, and we place them into their first job. And at first, I was really, really motivated by working directly with the students. They often describe what we do as life-changing. They retrain, they get their jobs, they're really excited. And this was really meaningful for me on a personal level. As the business continued to grow, we realized that we have no other choice but to shift our focus to business, purely because I don't think anyone can figure out how to make money by training beginners how to code without really making money from the enterprise side.
So you're executing essentially a pivot as you're going through this business. And that's fascinating because I just had Jason Shen on the podcast, and he talked about how to pivot and how to do that in an elegant way. So it's great to see these themes linking together.
Yes, it's so linked because in 2017, as a company, as the board, we decided to pivot towards the enterprise segment, and it was absolutely the right decision. Today, almost all of our revenues come from mid and large enterprise customers, the UK government. But what it meant for me personally is that I realized fairly clearly in that moment that my personal journey, what drives me, what is meaningful for me on a personal level, and what does the company need, they started to diverge. And it took me a couple of years in order to get from there to actually deciding to step down, and then another year to actually execute the CEO succession. So here is an interesting lesson here. CEO successions take time. It's not a process that should be rushed in a couple of months. So on the personal side, if I reflect on those 2 years, I was just not happy in my job. I was not looking forward to Monday mornings or Tuesday mornings, and I just felt like I was trapped inside the company, and I had no other choice but to do it because the company needed a chief executive. The company was doing reasonably well, going somewhere. We were making progress. The feedback from the board was fairly good. I was not a perfect CEO, but I was not failing either. And it was a very confusing situation because I felt like I was doing a good job. It was a job that mattered. Things were going in the right direction. But personally, I felt really, really conflicted inside. And so I think it was not a coincidence that it was around that time that I experienced my first and only depressive episode, which was really quite unpleasant. And I felt that it was connected to this sense of misalignment between who am I on the inside and what I want to do with my life and what the company needs from me.
So that's really interesting to point out. When you talk about there was misalignment, there was divergence between your skill sets and energy and where the company was going, that leads to breakdown in your mental health and feeling depressed. Those are also symptoms of burnout, of course, and burnout in many ways people misunderstand. And I think that burnout is just about working so hard that you're done. In reality, burnout can come from the fact that we are misaligned with where my energy wants to go and where it's spending its time, and that can cause a lot of mental health problems. But just generally speaking, it actually reduces our efficacy as CEOs if we're in that burnout state. Do you think that the depressive episode that you're talking about was linked to burnout, or was there something else driving it?
I definitely experienced some burnout symptoms, but it was not linked to working like crazy. Yes, sure, I worked hard, but I took holidays. I did not work on most weekends. I tried to keep it fairly balanced. It wasn't because I was sleeping in the office, but this sense of misalignment that some part of me is being violated for reasons I can't clearly explain was really, really present. It felt like life was really pulling me in a different direction. And that was the personal side of the story. I just realized that I don't want to live like this for the next 10 years. But on the professional side, the company also needed a different leader. Because we shifted to the B2B market, it needed a chief executive who really deeply understands the needs of large companies. How to sell into multi-million contracts into huge corporations, how to navigate internal politics, and so on. This is not my skill set, and this is not the skill set that I want to learn. And so in 2019, I saw fairly clearly that I should be doing something else on a personal level, and the company would benefit from a different chief executive.
So it really had there's really two parts to this decision. It sounds like there's the skills part, which says, hey, my background is in B2C. That's what I've done before. That's what energizes me. And now we need to shift because of this pivot into someone who has enterprise sales experience on the B2B side. So, or at least can run those type of processes and run those types of companies. So there's the skills part. And then there's the energy part, which is, hey, I just feel like maybe I'm not in the right place right now, or I've been doing this for long enough, or I'm somehow misaligned. So those two come together and you're like, okay, I'm now understanding that we need to make a change.
Yeah, but there is another angle on this process. In the background, the organization kept growing, and my role also started to evolve inevitably, because in the beginning, I was a founder. Even though I might have had a CEO title, I was really a founder, and my focus was on making sure the company survives and finds the product market fit. As the company started to grow and we found a good degree of product market fit, I had to step into the role of a CEO, and my focus shifted away from working on the product to building the company that builds the product. And that was also the moment that when I realized, okay, this is what the company needs from me as a chief executive, but this is not what I want to be focused on for the next decade of my life. Because frankly, what I find really, really meaningful on a personal level is making a difference in someone's life on a personal level. That's why I was so aligned in the beginning when we were working directly with the students, and I knew them by name and I knew their stories. And that's why things started to feel increasingly misaligned. As I found myself running a larger business through a senior management team and spending more time in front of Excel and less time in front of real people.
So just to give us a sense of scale, what was the size of the business when this is happening?
When I left, the team was 65 people.
Okay, so 65 people, multiple tens of millions in revenue, big customers, lots of stuff going on. So you are really being asked to have this CEO organizational role as opposed to founder. I'm building from the startup. I'm, trying to figure stuff out as I go, which are very different skill sets.
Yeah, and I remember one day I woke up early in order to spend, I think, 2 hours commuting to meet an HR team of one of our large clients, a large retailer. And it was the right thing to do for the business. But inside, I felt, do I really want to wake up on Monday morning to talk about talent needs of a large retailer? It's important work. It's meaningful work. It needs to be done, but it was not my challenge to face.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This is reminds me of so many other conversations that I've had throughout both the Conscious Entrepreneur podcast and the summit that we run. When you're talking about this, I'm hearing tones of, zone of genius. So Gay Hendrix's concept, and you're realizing the hard way that your zone of genius lies elsewhere from where your work is happening, which contributes to the feelings of misalignment and burnout. And then, I also just want to highlight the really, really different skill sets from someone who is founding a company at the early stage, and it's messy and it's chaotic, and your job is to figure out what part of this spaghetti is going to stick to the wall, right? Like if I do all these things, which one has any traction whatsoever? And you're operating in a mindset that is, hey, this is about curiosity and openness and running experiments and figuring stuff out. That's the founder mentality. Shifting then to CEO mentality, which is a totally different form of leadership. And it's about taking something instead of from 0 to 1, 1 to 10, and 10 to 100, and so on. And a lot of people don't make that shift. Some people try and fail. And in others, and I think this is where your story gets even more interesting, you realize, hey, you know what? I'm not going to do this 1 to 10 leap. I'm going to find someone else to come and help me out. So then you went to someone, you worked with your chairman, I believe, right? To bring her in as CEO?
Yes, but it didn't quite happen in one go.
Okay.
So eventually, I did sit down with Claudia, who was then our chair, and said, Claudia, there is no rush whatsoever. I'm not resigning. I'm not going anywhere. But we need to start a conversation about maybe bringing a new chief executive at some point for all the good reasons. And at that point, Claudia listened and said, "Okay, I hear you. Let's start exploring it." And it wasn't until several months later, once we had many board conversations and we aligned on the profile for the potential CEO candidate, and we discussed how we want to approach the search process, that Claudia said that actually maybe we should have a conversation. I would like to be considered for this role. And we had another conversation, and I made an argument that it was actually a good moment for her to step down from her CEO role because she was a chief executive at another business. And things were going pretty well in that business. She had a really good deputy CEO. So it was a good moment for transition. And long story short, we interviewed her as a candidate, and she's been running the business since 2020.
Okay, so that was the ending, and it sounds like in between there were some additional steps and stories. So how did it? Tell us about how it felt to go to or to start opening up on this, to say, hey, maybe I'm not the right person for this. Maybe there is something else going on. What was your inner world like as you were doing that, having those conversations?
My inner world was a mess, to be honest, because I was under a bit of a pressure at work because around the same time we were closing a funding round, which, as everyone listening will know, involves a lot of talking about the future in very, very positive terms. At the same time, I was also going through a divorce. My marriage had collapsed, and that was taking a lot of my attention at home. And at the same time, I was also facing lots of fears along the lines of: is this the right decision? Is it the moment of weakness? Do I just need to persevere and bite my upper lip and keep going because it's not supposed to be easy? What about money? What am I going to do next? Will other people respect me? If I try to raise for another company, will investors invest in me, or will I forever tarnish my reputation? So all these questions were really alive in my mind, and in the moment, it really felt more of a mess than anything. And on top of it, I didn't really know. I didn't really know where to look for guidance. I was working with with a coach, and I had and still have an excellent relationship with Claudia, who was then my chair. But it felt like there was no blueprint, no example, no playbook that would say, okay, this is how you go through all of this if you find yourself in this place.
So this is a big deal. I just want to reiterate what you just said here. So you're going through a financing round. So in a financing round, the investors are all making a bet, not just on the business, they're also making a bet on you. Yeah. So you've got that going on. So and I'm just guessing here, you're probably feeling like, oh boy, I hope they don't ask too many questions. I hope we don't get too deep on this. So you probably have some element of imposter syndrome just on the fact that you have these thoughts about, am I the right person or not? You then have this turmoil in your personal life with the divorce that's going on. And then you said you had all these, kind of other pressures and fears around, are people going to continue to respect me? What happens, next? So what's my next move going to be in the future? How is this going to have any long-term implications, which are all very valid? And at the same time, I'm guessing that a lot of the pressures that you were feeling were actually self-inflicted and made up by you, as opposed to coming from the outside world. Yeah. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. In fact, the outside world, not many people knew about it, only really my inner circle, but everyone was nothing but supportive. But on the inside, the book Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. Yes. There is a quote somewhere in the middle that says something like, great CEOs don't quit. And if you want to be great, basically, don't quit. I'm quoting from memory. And right. That quote from this book really stayed in my mind for years. I was thinking, am I really going to be a failure of some kind if I decide to step down as a CEO. And I really did not see this as an opportunity to find a win-win solution for both the business and myself. It felt like an opportunity to ruin all the good things that we built over the previous decade.
Yeah, I mean, we've all heard this like literally a million times, that you got to stick with it. You got to have grit and perseverance, and winners don't quit, and all this stuff. And it gets baked into us. And then as founders and CEOs, it's like, well, if I have any doubts whatsoever about my future in this business, am I somehow a bad CEO? Am I somehow the wrong person in this role? So you are certainly not alone in carrying around some of these, frankly, toxic and unhelpful beliefs that we get fed by society, or that we get fed by the startup media and startup culture. And I like the way that you reframed it, because then you started thinking, what's the win-win here? What's the thing that's good for Evgeny, good for the company, good for other stakeholders, new CEOs, et cetera? So tell us about that shift.
Yep. So one thing I learned since stepping down is that nearly every founder CEO considers it at some point. I was absolutely not an exception. Not everyone chooses to, but everyone asks themselves the question, am I the right person for the next stage of the journey as the job inevitably changes?
Well, yeah, I mean, we recently had Amy from Sifted on the podcast, and she shared that incredible statistic that 49%, I think it is, of founders consider quitting this year. So we know that this is a question that comes up a lot, even though it doesn't get talked about very much.
Yeah, it's a question which comes up a lot in private conversations. But one thing that helped me was a very good and very trusting relationship with my chair. And we were able to approach the conversation without any rush and with a lot of trust. I was trusting her that the board would not just have a knee-jerk reaction and try to push me out of the business. I also made a good decision, as I saw later in retrospect. I made a good decision to start this conversation relatively early on, when I was still committed to and able to run the company for the next year or two. Between the conversation with my chair and me stepping down, there were 14 months. In those 14 months, COVID happened, we went into the lockdown, we faced other challenges. So there was plenty of work to do.
Right.
And I think it was really helpful and really important that I didn't raise this question when I felt like I've got no more energy, but I've got no other options but to basically step down as soon as possible. That would have been a mistake.
So the timing is really important here, and I think the point is, don't wait until you're burned out at the very last end of the rope and just ready to throw it all in to have these types of conversations. Start them sooner. Make people aware of your personal skills, your goals, your ambitions, where you want to go, where you see things fitting in, and come up with a plan that can work for the long term. And if I remember from your work, the best thing to do is to have open conversations early on, even just about, hey, what's this going to look like in 2 years? What's it going to look like in 3 years? Then what happens? And the sooner we can have those open conversations, the more likely we are to have a win-win outcome.
Yeah, because the job of a founder CEO really changes over time, and the more the founder reflects on what's going to come next year or in 2 years' time, and the more alignment there is with the board, the higher the chances that a win-win, successful, smooth transition is going to be found. In my experience, things tend to go wrong when no one really talks about CEO transition. And then either the founder comes to the board and says, I had enough, I just really need to step down right now for whatever reason. Or the board realized, okay, we've had enough, this CEO needs to leave as soon as possible. And these are not good scenarios. It's much, much easier and better to start the conversation early before you have to, and continue it over the years to make sure that you maximize your chances of success.
Mm-hmm. And there's an interesting thing that comes up as it relates to incentives and compensation, of course. So as the founder CEO, you're typically going to be paid well below market. You're going to have a big equity stake in the company. So your payout, your outcome is all in the future, right? And it's all based on the value that you're creating. If all of a sudden we decide we need to go find a professional, quote unquote, CEO to come in here and run the company, that person is probably not going to be working for the same market discount that you are. They're probably not going to have the same equity upside that you do. They'll have some, right? But not on the same scale. And so then we need to start thinking about, well, what does this mean for how we compensate this person, but also for the CEOs who's leaving? Is like, how do I make sure that I'm doing this in a way that I'm not totally giving away control or somehow not letting the full potential of whatever the business is get realized?
Yep. And here I really recommend to companies, to the boards, to be very supportive and understanding of the financial situation of the founder. The mistake that founders sometimes make is that they look at their financial situation and realize, okay, I haven't had an exit yet. I don't have huge savings. I want to figure out what's next for me before I leave my company. And they try to time their CEO succession with whatever they're going to do next. And this is not a good situation for the company. From the company perspective, the succession should happen when it's right for the company. And the window can be anything up to a couple of years. So the founder CEO should be ready to continue for as long as necessary with the full focus on the company, but then get out of the way as quickly as needed if the new CEO becomes available. And the way to make it happen from a very pragmatic perspective is to offer some financial certainty to the outgoing founder CEO, effectively saying that if you do choose to step down, you will not have to worry about paying your mortgage for some meaningful period of time, which has the effect of the founder really relaxing a little bit and focusing their full attention on the success of the company and the success of the CEO transition.
In your research for the book, what did you learn that most founder CEOs wind up doing after they transition? Do they go to found a new company? Do they go to other CEO roles? Does someone just go get a job? Does everyone become a coach? What are the things that are the most likely next step?
I would say that different people do different things. There isn't just one thing that is very common. But in my research, I identified 7 career pathways, or rather 7 next steps. Quite obviously, it can be starting your next company, number one. But also some founders join their own senior leadership team. So let's say they realize that they don't want to be, or they can't be, the chief executive, but they would be a good chief strategy officer or chief product officer, and then the new chief executive comes in and they start reporting to them. Sometimes they go and join someone else's startup. They understand how the startup world, maybe they're not ready to start their own business, but they could be a really good right-hand man for another founder. Some founders go into corporate. As someone I interviewed for the book told me, she really appreciated learning opportunities and financial stability that working for a mid-sized bank gave her after running her own startup. It really made a big difference. Some founders become executive chairmen of their own companies. Some go into investment, becoming either angel investors or joining a fund. And finally, the 7th route is going freelance, whether it's coaching, advisory, consulting, or building a freelance career of some kind.
And so what did you wind up doing as it relates to Makers?
So at Makers, I stayed as the board as a non-executive director. So when Claudia joined as a chief executive and stepped down as a chair, we later hired a new chair, Guy Fernando, and I stayed and to this day I am a non-executive director on the board. So I don't have any operational role for the business. but I'm there to help whenever I can.
So one of the things that I hear you saying is it's important to have time built into this, and it's time to make sure that the job is done well. It's time to make sure the transition is done well. It's also time to reflect for the CEO who's leaving, to say, what do I want to do next? Why is it so important for us to take the time to rest and reflect on the career options, as opposed to, like we all are, just impulsive action go-getters to do so? Why is it important for us to take a step back and really be thoughtful about what we do next?
So the moment when a founder CEO leaves their job is often very confusing. First of all, every single founder CEO I spoke to about this needs rest. No one leaves the startup they've been running for 10 years full of energy. Nearly everyone needs time to rest and recover, slow down, and just get in touch with what is it that they need deep inside. It's also important to reflect because founders often, quite literally, don't see opportunities ahead of them. Because if running my own company is the only thing I've ever done, it can be very difficult to imagine what it could be like to work at a large corporate or join someone else's startup or do something else. So taking time to slow down and rest and reflect on your career options can be invaluable, because this moment is truly precious. It's a little bit like a save point in a video game. You get all your network and achievements and reputation and connections, but you can choose a different direction for your career without losing all of this. And so my advice is not to jump into what's familiar, not to go and start another startup because this is what you've been doing for the last 10 years. Maybe you choose to do something different.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's one of these times when there's so much opportunity in front of you, right? There's so much out there, and you could say, oh, I could do all these things. And if we're not driven by fear and anxiety and whatever stories that we have inside, then we're able to see the bigger picture and understand what might be out there. If we're just being driven by all the stresses that we're used to, then we're likely to be myopic and maybe not make the best long-term decision.
Yeah, exactly. And this is why rest matters. Just slowing down and allowing yourself to feel what you feel, and also to make sense of what just happened.
And so tell us about the transition. So once we've got a new person on board, assuming that their skill set matches what we want and what we're interested in, what's the protocol for not getting in their hair? What's the protocol for spending the right amount of time to train them and get them up to speed, and then making a graceful exit?
So you're absolutely right. It's important to not to get in their way. One mistake founder CEOs sometimes make is they step down as CEOs, but they still try to continue influencing the company. Maybe they hang around in a vaguely defined founder role, which is full-time. So they show up in the office and on paper, they're not running the business. In practice, they're still sharing their opinions and preferences. And this can be very disruptive for the business. They do it with the best of intentions, but what ends up happening is that the new chief executive feels undermined. The team is confused about who is in charge. The old CEO feels like, okay, I'm not a CEO anymore, so I don't have full freedom of movement. And there are no winners in this scenario. So in this situation, a founder CEO should either get out of the way completely and recognize that they're not running the business anymore, or if they're staying involved, be very, very deliberate about what their new role is, and respect the new role and fully realize that they're not running the company anymore. As I keep repeating in the book, it's okay to stay, it's okay to step down. But if you wanted to run your company, if you want to continue running the company, you should have stayed as a CEO. If you chose to step down, don't try to run your company.
Right. This is about sticking with your choice and making it clear. And by the way, the startup world, not just the corporate world, is littered with examples of CEOs. I mean, it's going on with Disney right now, right? Bob Iger retires, leaves. Bob Chapek comes in, everything turns into a mess. Guess what? They bring Iger back in to continue to run the company. There's all that stuff about same thing at Twitter, like all these big companies, you know, they have this thing where the founder says they're leaving, doesn't really let go. Everything is a mess. People don't know who to go to. Everyone's confused. And, you know, it really winds up not being in the benefit of anyone to have them sort of sticking around or lurking in that capacity as opposed to a clean break. And at the same time, a clean break is very jarring, I'm sure, for the founder.
Yeah, absolutely. It can be very jarring. So this is not to say that clean break is the only option. But if the founder stays involved, they should be very clear about the fact that someone else is running the business. And by the way, it may well happen that the new CEO is not the right CEO. Maybe the founder needs to step back in. But then the right step forward is to go to the board and discuss the situation and replace the CEO, but overriding them on a tactical decision by decision basis, trying to course correct, is highly unlikely to go well.
So based on all this, Evgeny, any other pitfalls that a founder thinking about their future should be avoiding? Like, what are the mistakes that you just saw people make over and over again?
People tend to procrastinate with having the conversation with the board or their inner circle of supporters. Because CEO succession takes time. The more time you have, the higher the chances that you will have a good succession, because you will just have a room for maneuver. And so founders often make the mistake of waiting until they've got no gas left in the tank and they just can't go on anymore. And then they are at some stage of burnout, but there is still no successor yet. So that's one common mistake. And the other is what we've just discussed. Undermining the new CEO by staying around and still trying to influence the company.
So the two big lessons are: do this sooner rather than later. Even if you don't know the answer, at least start the conversation, have a framework for the conversation that says, hey, how are we going to do this? Do that sooner rather than later. And then understand your role. Meaning, if you do step down as CEO, guess what? You are no longer the CEO. If you stay in the company, you're still not the CEO. So understanding your role, have this conversation sooner rather than later. I think this is such an interesting thing because I know a lot of people who've built successful companies and then stepped away. And for them, you know, one of the big things is this loss of identity that happens. So, hey, I am the person who built this company for 20 years. Who am I without my business? Who am I if I'm no longer the founder and CEO of such and such company? And that's a big deal for people. It can open up all sorts of things for them. And we have this terrible enmeshment problem in the startup world of, you know, you basically merge with your company. How do you successfully deal with that when it comes up?
You deal with it slowly. Rest and recovery. You can't invent a new identity by next Monday. It's not a process driven by personal will. It's a process of letting go and allowing something new to emerge. And here, a reflection on what happened, why you might have chosen to step down, how it happened, what were the lessons, and allowing something new to emerge, trying different things, not rushing into something new, reflecting regularly on how you feel and what does it mean, what are the stories that maybe are present in your life. All of this will eventually allow something new to emerge. But there is a big difference here between allowing something to emerge in a very natural and organic way as a side effect of you living in a different way, and trying to force it by waking up and deciding, okay, as of today, I'm not a founder CEO of my business anymore, and I've got nothing to do with it. As of tomorrow, I'm going to be someone else. This process takes time.
Wow, fascinating. This is such a useful tool for us to think about startup CEO succession and how we move and how the role evolves. And I think a lot of founders, at least people that I know, would be well served by having these kinds of conversations, by sticking to this and by realizing that there's nothing wrong with living in that founder mentality or having that founder skill set that says, I'm a 0 to 1 person. And once you realize that, you realize, hey, then there's someone else who's going to come and continue the company to grow. So if people are aware of that this is an option for them, and if they're smart about how they think about succession and transition, and if they're open to having these types of conversations, then it sounds like it can go much more smoothly, and it can be something that dramatically increases the likelihood of a positive outcome in the end.
Yeah.
Evgeny, anything you want to add before we wrap up?
Yes, a couple of more things. One is that founders often have all their eggs in one basket.
Mm-hmm.
Recognizing that your skill set lies in the 0 to 1 stage, and then getting from 0 to 1, hiring someone else to run the business, stepping down, building another company. Over the course of 10, 15, 20 years, the founder might end up with a portfolio of a few companies, as opposed to dedicating their life to just one effort. So that's one consideration. Another consideration is that nearly all founders I speak to are at least somewhat concerned that if they start the conversation with their boards, the investors will lose confidence and maybe even try to fire them. In my experience, this doesn't happen very often. From the investor's perspective, a founder is a huge asset for the business. Forcing the founder to resign against their will is really the last resort move because of its cost. It's highly disruptive. It has the potential to sink the company fairly quickly. And so, to a significant extent, this fear is not very substantiated.
It's misplaced. So people think, oh my goodness, if I show any vulnerability to the board or my investors, then they're immediately going to say, oh, Alex is the wrong guy for the job, and then show me the door. When in reality, they'll appreciate the conversation, they'll appreciate the thoughtfulness, and presumably also appreciate any type of early warning that we might provide.
Yep. And furthermore, if the founder starts the conversation, instead of waiting until the board starts the conversation, the founder will have more options available, more chances to make sure that the transition goes on their terms. Because if the founder CEO thinks about stepping down, the chances are that the board might also at some point realize that actually the company might benefit from a new CEO. And by that point, it might actually get to the point when the board might ask the founder to step down.
Got it. Fascinating. Well, hey, this has been a really, really great discussion. I really appreciate your contributions to the thinking around CEO transitions, founder transitions. Evgeny, thanks so much for joining us on the Conscious Entrepreneur podcast.
Thank you for having me.